Welcome in, everybody. Let's get right into it. I have another very special episode today. I am joined by a really unique guest, one of whose caliber I haven't yet had on the show before, my new buddy, Alan. Alan,
Hi,
how's it going?
excellent. Looking at a foot of snow outside.
Whew, we could certainly use that in Texas every once in a while, let me tell you. Well, Alan, we have you on here because you have written this book that caught my attention. Are you one of those people that pronounce it Demeter or Demeter?
Demeter.
Demeter. Okay. Uh, every now and then you run across someone who pronounces it Demeter. I think, oh, okay. How pretentious is this person about to be? Let's see. But where did you land on uh, Demeter?
Where did I
How did
land?
you? Yeah. How did you come to that title?
Um, well, actually, drawing from other sources, really, the concept of Demeter is an asteroid that is a geode that has been terraformed inside. And I thought, and I'm looking around. Of course, I pay attention to what's going on in our solar system and what exploration's going on. And Ceres always fascinated me. Large asteroid. It's about the size, I believe it's about the size of Pluto. It's about 1,000 miles in diameter. And so I started using that as a working model. And Ceres, of course, is I believe it's the Greek god. Now I have to think. And the Roman god of the same is Demeter. So I basically renamed Ceres by its alternate mythology name, which
Okay.
sometimes interesting because every once in a while I see the book classified as Greek mythology, and I said, this has nothing to do with mythology other than the name of the asteroid.
Right, right. Um, you kind of sprinkle a little bit throughout the book. Now, I'm going to talk about it in a really abstract manner because I'm really careful about giving away any spoilers because I definitely think this should be a series that people really get into. But you sprinkle throughout the book little nods to um either mythos or uh, books and plays like I think one of the chapters was Etu Brute,
Oh, et tu,
and
Brute?
it's yeah, and there's something in the book called the Osiris, um, that comes in at the end there, especially. Well, I'm jumping ahead, but what I found notable was usually in books like this, if there is going to be any kind of sprinkling of um, things like, well, uh, using the name Demeter or Osiris, or uh, giving a nod to Caesar, right? There, it's usually something saturated with that. It's usually a book that's going to be you're going to find references or uh, analogies all over the place that are, oh well, this is of course, the story of Ra and Horus and Seth, or this is just a retelling of what happened to Caesar on the Senate floor. But here, it's just a really light, tasteful sprinkle. Did you have that in mind, or did you pull back any on putting that kind of stuff in your work?
Not at all. It's just my warped sense of humor. Uh,
Okay.
Probably the funnest one that goes throughout the whole series is the protagonist is a Diet Coke addict. So he's always looking for the equivalent of Diet Coke wherever he goes. And the way the initial books are set up, it's actually it's Earth type foods and beverages are readily available in this because a large percentage of the populace are from Earth, but not all. So it's yeah, those sprinkles are more tongue in cheek. Take a moment and enjoy the moment. I love writing. I love the story. Originally, I designed it as a 3-book series, and I still remember getting about halfway through the first book and saying, and I just laid out. It says, "No, it's going to take me 5 books to tell the whole story, and then it will be done." It's not designed to carry on for a million books. It's got a definite story arc. It's got a definite beginning and end. Probably one of the themes that keeps coming up is bullying at different levels and how the protagonist deals with that. So that's probably one of those parts that I keep drawing back to as I go through the story. And he takes a little bit of different approach to all that. So
Yeah. One of the things that stuck in my mind about Ryder was I was reading and asking myself, okay, is this going to be hero's journey type esque? Is it going to be is Joseph Campbell going to come over my shoulder and go, oh look there it is? Um, is it going to be, say, an Arthurian kind of tale? Is Ryder going to find his knights along the way? How is Cynthia going to fit into all this? Um, it, but then I kept reading, and it made me remember uh, series like Artemis Fowl, uh, Charlie Bone, that I read when I was getting into young adult fiction, and I was like, wow, this fits right alongside those series in the bookshelf.
yeah, Artemis
So,
Fowl is a fun parallel. Um, oh shoot, can't even think of the other one. Percy Jackson and the Lightning
mhm.
Thief series. Yes, my family and I are avid readers. We've read lots of the young adult fiction. But if you're looking for inspiration, my inspiration for writing, I always go back to this, is when I was in about 6th grade, I fell in love with Robert Heinlein and his juvenile fiction, science fiction. And so it's really an adventure story. It does have some underlying themes as you go through the entire story. Rather than finding his knights along the way, you watch his friends evolve into the knights along the way. Characters that really in the first book are almost, you'd almost think, well, maybe they're toss-off characters. They actually have their own plot lines that develop as the story continues. So yeah, and then Debbie, if you haven't fallen in love with Debbie yet, you certainly would. And for your listeners, Debbie is Ryder's younger sister, who I don't even know how to. Actually, the best way to describe her, the central characters are actually personality-wise drawn from my children.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
and as bizarre as Debbie is, there's no exaggeration in her character to her real person.
Did that make those characters influenced by your children easier or more difficult to write?
Easier, much easier, because I get into situations, say, how are they going to react? And I know how they react. I know what kind of responses they're going to have. So, yeah, I did actually make it a lot easier. And they are so different that it works well for the narrative. Uh, the very quiet, reserved. Somebody mentioned, I had not read it, but the central character does have some parallels to the central character in Ender's Game. I think their personalities are quite different. Their journey is very different, but there are some distinct similarities between those characters. Hadn't read the book series, which is kind of ironic. There is some irony there because Orson Scott Card is like a third cousin of my wife. Uh,
Oh,
she's Yeah, some we've never met, but it's just one of those ironic twists. You say, "Nah, that's not real." Yeah, that's accurate. But I did see that. I never read the books, but I did watch the movie. Harrison Ford really distracted me in that. But still, the storyline was really good, and I said, "Oh, I do see the parallels." So there are some parallels there.
As a writer, do you study or pay any kind of attention to reoccurring writing tropes or themes or backgrounds that might crop up? Some things that I refer to as often foundational cornerstones of science fiction writing, like they could range from being themes to actual uh, writing tools. Like you have clones, you deal with a virus, time travel is a big one. You have the dystopian future where Soylent Green is people, or everybody is being fed roach-made protein bars on the Snowpiercer train. Right? Things are very cyclical in some big groups of books, right? Things repeat. They're used over and over. Do you make yourself conscious of that when you're writing, or do you just, all right, this is my story. Here's what I need to say. Here's how it needs to be told. And then you step back and you go, oh, well, I did use that, or uh, there were no clones right there. There was no tyrannical king or tyrannical father figure that needed to be overthrown for the main character to come into his own or anything like that.
Um, I choose B. I don't really pay much attention to what the other writers have used or tropes. Uh, the one thing I think one thing I do kind of address here is, and it, Robert Heinlein again is my if I were having a mentor, it had a clue who I was. Uh, Takes a very optimistic perspective of the future, and so in that sense, I follow kind of his model of I don't need another dystopian novel. That's the one that grabs me all the time and says, gee, is everything dystopian? This is a much more, I mean, it's got its problems, it's got its challenges, it's got its tragedies that had to happen. It was almost fate oriented in some ways, but it's still an optimistic story with an optimistic direction the whole thing goes in. So is that somebody else's trope? I don't know. I mean, like I said, the closest I think of is Heinlein. If you go to the first one you mentioned, Artemis Fowl, a little bit that way. There's misadventure, there's challenges, there's certain tragedies that happen along the way. So that'd probably be as close as I can think of to that. Um, yeah, this is more, I'd say, more of an adventure story than focused on some of the specific tropes. And it's one of the challenges I thought of, and I addressed it in the book, in the whole series, was that all the key characters are humanoid. We don't have reptile creatures. We don't have um, other sorts of bizarre creatures in here. The aliens are humanoid. Uh, they're not all. In fact, there is part of the story you got into that with the mythology. Probably started a little slow for you because I cover a lot of background in it. Is where did people from Earth come from? And so that particular mythology is addressed in its own way. But as I think more and I dig deeper into it, I said, well, is that the only type of intelligent life in the universe? And I address it specifically and in short in the story, but it has not a lot to do with, in fact, it has nothing to do with the plot line. Just identifies that, yes, there are other types of intelligent life in the universe, but it's not being affected in this story. In fact, I like the one where I have the one of the, and that doesn't affect the plot, so I can mention it, is I talk about the gas giants. that are intelligent lives and live so long that they have absolutely no interest in any of the political or uh, interstellar questions that might come up. They're totally involved in their own world and have nothing to do with the humanoid, adventurous, want to gain territory sort of creatures at all. So they're there, but there's no real connection.
Hmm. Uh, I I always wonder, and I've got a good number of author pals now because they still talk to me. I don't know why, but they do. And uh, I I'll sometimes ask them the same thing that I kind of put to you is are you afraid of just rewriting something that might have inspired you and you've subconsciously tucked away and it comes out in your work. There's a funny online uh, meme that says Simpsons did it because no matter and the idea is that it's the Canterbury effect, right? It's that no matter what the story is, the Simpsons did it already. Uh, so there's nothing that you could do that's original enough that you can truly claim it as your own because the Simpsons already took care of it. Do you ever have that fear or that notion that you might write something repetitive?
um, Not so much a fear. I have a different fear, but that's not the one. Uh, because I try and focus on character-driven characters, it doesn't really matter. Am I intentionally going to lift some other storyline or plot device? No, I'm not going to. If I see it coming, I would change it. Could it happen? Sure. I mean, there's going to be like Ender's Game. That was a big surprise to me. I said, "Oh my gosh, did I write the same book?" I guess that would be your question. And so going into the again, I only watched the movie, never read the books, but I said, "No, there's some similarity, especially at the beginning, but boy, it gets goes in a totally different direction because it's so focused on the characters." The fear I have, I've gotten another book that's getting ready to be published, Salt of the Earth, and they've asked me to write a sequel to it. And I'm looking at it, and I've written a few chapters of it, and I'm going back. And what I'm really afraid of is am I just writing a second book to write a second book, or does it have a real story to tell? That's what I'm more worried about is making sure that the story develops the characters and develops a plot line that makes sense, that keeps the readers interested. Because if the readers aren't interested, I'm not interested. I actually sometimes laugh when I'm writing a section of a story or get teary eyed when something else happens. I love that experience. I don't want it to become something mechanical.
That's a good point. Um, when you're writing, do you ever put up guardrails on yourself? Maybe our writing styles are far too different for this question to translate, but when I write purely as a form of mental exercise. So I'll write science fiction and horror short stories that are a good 20 pages, and eh, I'll go so deep into detail on some things. I just kind of make myself go, "Whoa, wait a minute." Uh, there's a story that I sent to a couple of buddies where and it plays with the idea of the only part of us that is sentient is our nervous system. So
Okay.
our brain, our eyes, our nerve endings, that's all that makes up who we are. You could take away the fingers, the some of the other organs, you can replace them, you can replace limbs, but you're still you,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I thought of, well, wait, what if another bodily system became autonomous? So I played around with the idea that your skeletal structure now has its own conscience
Oh
and tries
my.
to in it tries to rip itself out of you, right? So there's this poor guy that goes to get coffee and his skeleton is ripping itself out of him trying to get free, right? In the middle of this coffee shop. But it doesn't kill the guy. He's still sentient. He's just this massive blob of person lying on the floor and his skeleton is kind of looking at itself and yeah, but I was like, whoa, this is kind of beyond gory because the detail and everything. Um, but when you're in the thick of it, when you're in the thick of the weeds in your writing, do you ever do that? Do you ever have those recognitions of, man, maybe I should pull back on this a little bit?
Yes, it was a different story. I have two other books that are being published right now. The other one is about um, scientists have discovered a means of miniaturizing all living things. So tied into climate change and overpopulation and everything else, they miniaturize all animal life, including humans. And they're able to prepare for it, so it seems like it's going to be utopia. But then they run into a problem. But anyway, that's getting into the storyline. But I was reading the first couple of chapters to my grandchildren, and I could see their eyes glazing over, and I realized I'd done exactly that. I had just gotten so much into the weeds, into the details that I felt needed to be told for the story for the reader to understand it. It was too much detail, and so I backed off. I actually had to tear up a couple of chapters and start rewriting. Saying, no, I can't give that. If I give that detail, it's got to be spread across the book. It can't be all up front. I tend to front load those kind of details, which is probably doesn't help me.
Sure.
I think of Charles Dickens and Great Expectations. I was reading that in a class, and I was in pain reading the first 50 pages of that book. It was just so dry and so much setup. But after the first 50 pages, I couldn't put it down. And I sometimes think, am I being too Dixonian here? I need, especially when I've talked to agents and stuff, they say, you gotta grab them in the first 2 pages. I said, well, okay, that's exciting, but is that is that important to the story? And so that's my perspective on the whole thing. Good, bad, or indifferent.
Sure. I felt very much the same way reading Game of Thrones. I started to read it before the series started to come out, and man, it felt like homework. It it felt like a chore trying to get through the first book. Like it was still really interesting. I kept going back to the back cover and reading the prompt for the story. I'm like, well, this sounds like it's right up my alley. This sounds like something I would love, but man, give me the cliff notes. Get like this is crazy. Um, I I have this difference that I sort of kind of came up with. It's the difference between what I call hard science fiction and high science fiction. Hard science fiction focuses on all of the details. It's incredible detail oriented. It's Tolkien writing 3 pages about pipeweed or a tree, right? It's telling you how everything works, how everything is oriented, how it's set. Like it's not leaving much to the imagination. High sci-fi is think H.P. Lovecraft or any of his contemporaries in the early 1900s. It's written in quote unquote old modern English where it's just not how people speak anymore. The vocabulary is still in our vernacular, but it's not in modern day conversational syntax. So it's not things that we readily look at and understand. Um, when I run into either one of these, hard or high science fiction, I gotta sit down. I have to save this for a weekend because it's gonna be a chore. It's gonna be something I enjoy, but I would much rather, if I'm on the go, read something like Demeter, right?
Mhm.
Where I understand everything. There's plenty that's left to the imagination. I can play the movie in my head, um, and I don't feel like it's such a Herculean task.
That reminds me of have you read C.S. Lewis's trilogy, science fiction trilogy?
No.
Oh, you should look for that because it evolves in a really interesting way. Uh, and he became a devout Christian, and you get a lot of the Christian motif in it. But it starts off. Oh, let's see, what was the first one called? Darn, I can't remember the name of the titles. Anyway, the first one is just your classic laid back science fiction story. It's really fun. And that occurs, let's see, since that one on, ultimately, the protagonist is in all three books. And first he has to go to Mars. Actually, he's kidnapped to Mars. Then in the second one, the oversight, oversight, oversight beings send him to Venus, tied into the Adam and Eve story on Venus. And that one becomes a little more thoughtful. You have to think. And then his concluding book, if you weren't into books one and two, you would never finish it. But because I'd read books one and two, I said, oh, yeah, I see, but this is tough reading. That would be high. His third book was truly your high science fiction, but you've already bought in because you read books one and two. They are a great series. Just said I lent my books to an English professor when I was still in college, and she left and took them with her. So it was years later before I found copies of my own again.
Oh no. Oh no. Um, a really great example of the marriage between those two ideas is if if you ever want to torture yourself, pick up a Warhammer 40,000 book because those
Well,
things, I man, the the detail is I don't think there's any other um, popular book franchise that you have to hold so much at once. Like to understand what's happening in the modern timeline, you also have to understand the Horus heresy, the war in heaven, the sundering of the Eldari, the death of the old gods. Like there's so much context to a fight happening on a planet between uh, some big literal snot demons and some Imperial guardsmen. So I very much enjoy reading that kind of stuff because it's a really great sense of accomplishment once you've done it, but you don't feel good about yourself. You don't, you don't feel good in the moment. I feel really good in the moment reading things like Demeter, right? I feel like I'm on the adventure.
yes, that's well. In that case, I succeeded.
Yes.
And no, I'm
Yes.
not going to read Warhammer 4000. Did you say it was? I'm putting it on my do not visit list. I'm trying to think
That
of the big. There's a big popular one. Amazon just picked it up a couple of years ago and have been using as miniseries. What is it? It's got like 11 books in it, 4 million pages. Trying to remember the book. series. Can't remember it. Anyway, I listened to the first book, and it was very interesting. I said, "Am I willing to commit another 10,000 pages of reading to get the rest of the story?" So then I did the cheat thing. I went to Wikipedia and looked at the plot lines, and I said, "No, that's not worth 10,000 pages of reading to me." Somebody would be offended. I said that if I could remember the title of it, but I'll let that go. Not offend your listeners.
No, trust me, there are uh, a myriad of different kinds of listeners. If there was a series of books that I would implore you to read,
Mm-hmm.
if you are a fan of uh, light military science fiction, stories about families and tragedy, and war and intrigue, I would highly recommend the Star Wars Republic Commando series. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's it's 5 or 6 books depending on who you ask, written by Karen Travis. Um, it's written in the old expanded universe, meaning pre Disney acquisition.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things that aren't in it that are not currently considered canonical, but it is one of my favorite uh, series stories because of it deals with just about everything that you would want out of a gripping science fiction war story. Um, you mentioned Ender's Game a couple of times. It makes Ender's Game look like My Little Pony. I promise you. I promise you.
Okay, if we're going to share, are you familiar with Louise McMaster Bugeaud?
No, but now I want mac and cheese.
You do. Um, she wrote a delightful series. I don't know if she's finished. She's been finished a couple of times, and her book comes up. But it's Barrier, and the first two books are about what become background because they have a son who, due to a war, is born with very brittle bones. So he's in a militaristic society. And oh my gosh, Miles Vorkosigan, he is a hoot to read. And the stories are very good. You should look this up. She also writes fantasy. She's written the Paladin series, are very good. But I think you would like the start with Shards of Honor is the first book. And there is no Miles Vorkosigan in the first one. It's his future parents that the first two books are about. And they stand alone
Okay.
very, very well. But if you want real fun, once you get past that, Miles Vorkosigan is a hoot. Just hyperactive. He reminds me of he is a male version of a very successful, wealthy Debbie character.
Oh, okay. Okay. I like that. Well, I will definitely put that on my list. Might have it for a good couple of Christmas gifts. We'll see. Um, might be a non answerable question, but looking at it, at what we both do, you as an author, me as somebody who talks to authors, and who poses questions. What do you what do you think is the overall end game? To pardon the pun to earlier conversations, but what do you what do you think is the ultimate goal for people like you or I?
You ever see the movie 2012?
Oh, sure.
Okay. So John Cusack's character has written a book. It's a very good book, but nobody's ever read it. And he's kind of depresses him that nobody's read his book. So he finally runs into somebody that's read his book, and there's a certain sense of fulfillment. I think the end game for me is to tell a good story and to have people read it and love it. And if that happens, then I've fulfilled my mission. I originally started writing the books for my grandchildren to read, and kind of aimed it that way. But yeah, find somebody that's read it and really enjoyed it. It's just, the first book was published in 2014, but they just came out on audiobooks. And so I've had family and friends who wouldn't read the book have actually listened to the book series, and they're delighted. And that makes me smile.
All right, I like that. For some people, I think, uh, a lot of people have a very far-flung dreamer's idea, of being maybe a sci-fi commentator or an author in general, not just a science fiction author. Of maybe this book or this series that I create, maybe this will somehow uh, become the next social cultural touchstone iconic thing, right? The next 1984 that helps peel back some of the scales off of people's eyes or what have you. But I think in its own way, in a really big way, the goal of just being able to create something that people will enjoy, I think in its own way is just as, if not more, noble than, say, an Orwellian aspiration.
Well, I certainly don't have an Orwellian aspiration. Uh, Again, touching on bullying, it's an interesting premise of what's inside the heads of bullies. The bully in chapter one actually becomes a very critical character in the second, third, fourth, even the fifth book. And how Ryder addresses bullies is probably, from a theme perspective, the most, other than the adventure story itself, that's probably the theme that I carry throughout the book series. People aren't good, people aren't bad. Individuals are good, individuals are bad, but are they really bad? Is there something else inside? Once you know their story, there's more to them than just the actions they took on a given day.
Yeah, rehumanizing the bullies, right? Because all our interactions may be with them is their more sinister nature, right? Do you did you look at any one particular kind of bullying and say, let me break this up into levels and see how we can tackle it from different angles? Or did you see a whole wide array of different kinds of bullying and go, man, this all needs to be put in one place?
No, it's a wide array. Let me think. Are the bully one, bully one and bully two, both of the two individual bullies that are identified early in the book, not only are the characters based on real story, but the incidents are based on true stories.
Oh, wow.
Uh, Beyond that, when it gets more institutionalized, it's more based on theme, and the character of Ryder and how he addresses that sort of thing is kind of a big deal. In fact, it's a very big deal.
Okay. Um, do you think that there is there's a kind of bullying, maybe a lower level, maybe a high intensity level, that may be a form of confrontation that is beneficial?
The bullying itself in the storyline, to the protagonist, perhaps. If you're looking from the broader perspective of bullying in general, I mean, it pushes some people that would never take that next step that they need to take in their development. So if you think of a bully as a secondary character in life, for some people it actually probably does help because it pushes them to action. On the other hand, I've seen it go the other way more often than not. It diminishes the person that's being bullied to the point where they never get out of that cycle of, it's like abuse. And it is a form of abuse. And you get into that abuse cycle, you don't break it. So in this case, he breaks the cycle. So,
Okay. So it is a net negative, story aside.
yes, story aside, I think
Okay.
it's a net negative.
Okay. Yeah, I think most people would probably agree, because more often than not, we'll hear about the stories where it is a net positive, where, like Ryder, that's how people end up, just like him, where they do overcome things, and it does either kind of give them the kick in the pants that they need, or it does nudge them along in their developmental processes as a young adult, or maybe even in a social or workplace setting. They were just kind of complacent. They had rusted and rotted, just skating by. But then something comes along and nudges them just a little too far, and they finally snap and they say, "You know what? I am going to do X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to be better than what you say I am, or I'm going to prove you wrong, that I'm not just some sort of waste of space."
Yeah, but for every one of those individuals, how many other individuals are there that go get a gun and shoot up their school?
Oh, I imagine you're right. I imagine it's a lot more in that camp
Yeah,
than in.
I think it's a net negative.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But I think that's a reason that stories like this are important ones, because, uh, well, who's the audience? It's a young adult readership, right?
Yes.
Okay, that age range is probably the one, or they're probably the ones dealing with bullies the most. Well, here's a really fun story, a really engaging story about how to deal with that, how to overcome it, how to make some Arthurian knight friends along the way that also grow with you, right? That also develop themselves, which is a great mirror up to life, right? Because it is a lot more real, because it's not just you that is doing all of the growing and the stumbling and picking yourself back up. It's everybody around you that has that same story going on at the same time, and they're dealing with all of the same things that you're dealing with. Um, so I think stories like this are important because it can show the young adult audience, hey, this is your story right now. It ends just like the bullying will. It will end. And guess what? Here's how you can do it. You can overcome it. You can grow from it. But you've got to have courage. You've got to be brave. You have to have some really solid friendships around you. And if you can't tell already, I really like the story.
Oh, good. Well, if you like the first one, you will love the second one.
Oh,
The
I
Barry,
imagine.
yeah, the Barry Hales character. It's one of those moments where you get a real laugh out loud moment because uh, they start off back on Earth again.
Well,
And they have to
Alan,
re-enter their previous lives.
ooh, ooh, that's definitely I know that will get uh people on Amazon getting into that second story, because it's definitely going to get me there. But where, tell the folks at home where they can get your work, sir.
Oh, I didn't actually stop thinking. Okay, you've got a problem if you're really interested in the book, because Demeter is a common search item on Amazon, and you may not find it, even searching for it. Orion Spur is the series, and if you're not familiar with Orion Spur sits between the Sagittarius arm and the Perseus arm of the galaxy. It's kind of a runt in the arms battle between the galaxy, in effect, and even in the theme of the story. But in reality, that's its status. So Earth is in Orion Spur, as is Demeter. And so Orion Spur is the series because that's the area in the galaxy where it's occurring. And the first book is Demeter. So you'd want Orion Spur, Demeter. And then the other books are Return to Demeter, Defending Demeter, Haumea, and it wraps up. Originally, the last one was going to be Endgame, and Marvel's Endgame was coming out. So that title is getting boring. So it's actually Paragon's Virtue.
Oh, okay.
So that's the series. It does end for those of you that like to read series and find that they never end. The storyline has a 5-book story arc that ends. I don't know if you'd say satisfactorily or not. It ends true to its story.
Okay. I think we've had a fair amount of stories end lately, giving us a bit of both. So I think people will be able to recognize what you mean because legendarily, the ending of the Game of Thrones series very unsatisfactory. uh, and if you look at how the rest of the seasons were made, not so true to form either. Um, but Marvel's Endgame, that was beautifully true to form, and it was very satisfactory. So I
Yes.
think I think we've had a fair amount of both camps to where people will recognize it. So I think we're safe there.
Okay. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's where you
Well,
find it. Ebook, what is it, Kindle or paperback or Audible book? I'm listening to the Audible books now and I'm enjoying them. I said, oh, I wonder what'll happen next.
well, I can't wait to get into the second one, Alan. Uh, thank you for coming on the show, sir. I cannot tell you what it means to me. Um, and yeah, thank you for your time.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Absolutely. All right, guys, that is all the time I have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in and stick around for more Sci Fi Unchained. But for now, live long and prosper, my friends, and may the Force be with us all.